أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم تكاد تميز من الغيظ كلما ألقي فيها فوج سألهم خزنتها ألم يأتكم نذير. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers and sisters in Islam. Welcome back to Qur'an Study. Surah Mulk, verse 8 is what we're going to study today, inshallah. My dear brothers and sisters, let us quickly recap what's happened in the surah so far. If you recall, the surah started out with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us unequivocally that dominion and ultimate rule and authority is His. And the proof of that was that He's the one who created the category of life and death. And that means those realities are inescapable for us as living things. And then God talked to us about the conditions of life that He has created, whether it's the creation of the cosmos and the stars. And He told us about His mercy and the beauty and the care that He has infused into whatever He has created. However, while God is generous, He also has rules. You cannot run amok in His kingdom without consequences. And over the last two verses, we saw just how severe and terrifying those consequences can be. We saw Hellfire wanting vengeance on behalf of God. It was ready to burst over. Now, one thing I want to say before we dive into today's verse, my dear brothers and sisters, those of us who grew up in the West, the idea of having authority and rules and regulation doesn't really vibe with us because, our culture is very individualistic and we want to run our own show. We want to be our own boss. So the idea of rules and dominion, it's something we tend to rebel against. However, psychologically speaking, having order and rules and boundaries is actually quite healthy for our psyche. If you look at the work of John Piaget in developmental psychology, we know that the emergence of play and fun occurs amongst children when there's structure in place. It's only when kids know what the boundaries are and the fences are, it's only within the confines of those fences and boundaries can play thrive and flourish. And when you fast forward to adulthood, you have psychologists like Carl Rogers and Emil Durkheim who talk about the fact that human beings crave order. We need to know what the standards are. In fact, Durkheim argues that if we don't have an objective source of right and wrong, we don't have rules and regulations, then a sense of anomie kicks in. What's that? It's translated as normlessness. When we don't have norms, especially when it comes to right and wrong, especially when it comes to morality, then that leads to anxiety. It can lead to nihilism and suicidal ideation. That's why religious people across so many different studies do much better than their secular counterparts when it comes to happiness levels, life satisfaction, levels of depression, suicidal ideation, bouncing back from failure, even the amount of charity that's given, and amount of time they spend in charitable causes. In all these metrics, religious people do way better than secular people. Why? Because rules and consequences are not altogether bad news. They give our lives the structure that we need. So that being said, let us continue with today's verse. تَكَادُ تَمَيَّزُ مِنَ الْغَيْظِ. Allah continues to describe to us the consequences. In the last verse, if you remember, Hellfire was described as snarling and growling, and it was ready to kind of boil over. In this verse, Allah tells us more about the pressure cooker situation that hell is. Allah says, تَكَادُ تَمَيَّزُ مِنَ الْغَيْظِ. As if hell is ready to rip itself apart from rage. And this is what Ibn Abbas told us. As if hell is ready to tear itself. As if it's ready to blow up from the vengeance and the fury that it contains. Nasallallahu al-afiyah. Ghayz in Arabic, my dear brothers and sisters, not just anger. It's ashaddul ghadab. It's the most intense anger someone can experience. And hellfire, it will manifest all that wrath and fury on the Day of Judgment. In fact, we're told in a narration from some of the Tabi'un that hellfire, when it growls and roars on the Day of Judgment, will be so terrifying that there will not be an angel nor a prophet except they will fall on their knees. Even Ibrahim alayhi salam will call out to Allah and plead to Allah, Ya Allah, I'm worried about myself. Nafsi, nafsi. Everyone humbled and in a state of terror, except our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as we're told in narrations. When humanity will finally approach him, he'll be the only one who will say, Ummati, Ummati, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, تَكَادُ تَمَيَّزُ مِنَ الْغَيْظِ. Hell is ready to explode from the wrath it's experiencing. And then Allah tells us, كُلَّمَا أُلْقِيَ فِيهَا فَوْجٌ سَأَلَهُمْ خَزَنَتُهَا. Every time a drove of people, a horde of people are thrown in there, the warden of hell, the custodian of hell, will ask them a question. Now, before we get into the question itself, Who is the warden and the gatekeeper of hell? His name is Malik. Malik, working on behalf of Al-Malik. As we're being told in Surah Mulk, وَنَادَوْا يَا مَالِكْ لِيَقْضِي عَلَيْنَا رَبُّكَ. We're told that the intensity of torture in hell will be so severe, they will call out to Malik and say, just end us. We don't want to exist anymore. This is what they'll be going through. May Allah protect us, my dear brothers and sisters. This is a reality we have to take seriously. It can't be just a thing we hear about and then we move on with our days. We have to see, do we have patience to endure this? Another thing I'd like to bring to your attention. Notice Allah says, كُلَّمَا أُلْقِيَ فِيهَا فَوْجٌ. Every time a group will be thrown in there. Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mention the fact that they'll be thrown in groups and not solo? This is a subtle hint in the Quran that those people who will end up in hell, it's probably because they were hanging out with people who are going to end up in hell. The group think, it's their peers. It was a social circle they kept, that these people were crossing red lines, so it became easy for the person to cross those red lines as well. We see this in the month of Ramadan, my dear brothers and sisters. There are some Muslims who don't fast. It's because of who they hang out with. They don't take Ramadan seriously, then it becomes easy for the person to not take Ramadan seriously. We know people in corporate America, they have happy hours, and everybody goes there, and many Muslims end up caving into that social pressure and peer pressure, and they end up going to those local bars as well. So Allah is telling us, choose your group wisely, pick your crew wisely, or you'll be toast, literally. And that leads us to now the question that the warden of hell will ask people who are being chucked in there, like firewood being thrown in a pit. As they're being hurled in there, he will say, Alam ya'tikum nadhir? Didn't a warner come to you to remind you of this day and the consequences and the red lines? Weren't you delivered the message? Notice this question right here is not the gatekeeper of hell just doing a casual check-in. He's asking this question as a rebuke. He's asking this question to further condemn them, to add psychological pain to their physical pain. And this goes back to the idea of adhab. Remember, adhab is to remove any joy or happiness from something. And hellfire is that one-stop shop to strip you of any joy and to unload all forms of painful punishments, psychological, physical. One thing very important to note here, Alam ya'tikum nadhir. The warden asks this question, apart from the fact that it's rubbing salt on their wounds, but it's also a throwback to Allah's justice. We're told in the Quran, وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا. We do not punish until a messenger has been sent to a particular demographic, to a particular nation. Meaning, unless the message was delivered, unless a messenger was there to tell them right from wrong and to show them the straight path, they do not qualify for punishment. And you notice the warden of hell is doing the same thing. He's like, you're here, which means clearly a messenger must have come to you. So if the messenger came to you, why didn't you take heed? And my dear brothers and sisters, in these verses of punishment, there's also a ray of hope that's being shown. Between the lines, Quran is telling us that it's Allah's policy that He will not punish until someone is exposed to the message. This offers a ray of hope for non-Muslims, for people who never had access to Islam, who never got to be exposed to the truth of Islam. Imagine people living in remote parts of the world. Imagine people living in, like feudal societies in medieval Europe, where all they had access to was Christianity. Those people never got to hear about Islam. Those people may have a shot on the Day of Judgment. And Islam is really the only religion that offers this ray of hope for people outside of our faith. So, my dear brothers and sisters, I'd like to wrap up our discussion with an action item. And that is, next time you're about to cross a gray line with Allah, which is what we call makruh in Islam, or you're about to cross a red line with Allah, which is what we call haram in Islam, ask yourself, interrogate yourself, Alam ya'tini nadhir? Didn't the message already come to me? Hold yourself accountable, because as Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu used to say, Hasibu anfusakum qabla an tuhasabu. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. Hold yourself accountable before you are held accountable. More we ask ourselves this question now, less likely it will be that the warden of hell will be asking us this question to further add insult to injury, my dear brothers and sisters. The Prophet told us in a hadith Qudsi that Allah says, وَعِزَّتِي لَا أَجْمَعُ عَلَىٰ عَبْدِي خَوْفَيْن. By my honor, I will not combine two fears upon my servant. If he fears me in this world, he'll be relaxed with me in the hereafter. But if he's chillaxing here, he'll be afraid of me there. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we take heed and that we reach the shore of the hereafter unscathed. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum.